So what happened was, some of you may be aware of the cartoon, if you have kids especially, of the cartoon Bing. It's a black bunny. I think we can show you what it looks like. That's Bing Bunny. It's a program on BBC. She was carrying out price changes in the aisle. She's worked in Sainsbury's, as we said, for 28 years. She picked up the cuddly toy and said, should we really be selling this toy? Black Lives Matter. Some might say a terrible joke. I mean, we shouldn't be selling black, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter.
It took me a long time to understand what the joke was, but I mean...
Yes, whatever it is, I mean, the question is, did it warrant her being sacked because it was racist? Because a colleague did complain that day, she was offended by the joke, and she sort of got this lady suspended from her job. So, joining us now is Inaya Folarin Iman, who's one of our GB News presenters. Welcome, Inaya. This is absurd, isn't it, surely?
I think it's completely absurd. I think that when it comes to hypersensitivity around race, the people that advocate that always think, or they assume that it's going to be the big bad racists that are going to be the ones that are going to be criticised. It's the people that are saying horrible, overtly racist things. But actually, in reality, hypersensitivity, when you can't really communicate about these issues openly and honestly and make jokes about them, the real victims of that are usually people at the bottom of society, people in precarious, low-paid employment. And actually, this is what you found now. This woman who's worked in this organisation for over 20 years is now potentially, if she didn't find another job, would have been unemployed for what is essentially just a joke. And it is really a joke. I agree, it's probably one that was lost on me. It's not necessarily the most funniest thing I've ever heard, but the idea that that is the basis for someone to lose their job, to be sacked, I mean, that's not the kind of society I want to live in.
I suppose whoever made this accusation of racism, they would have perhaps seen her as ridiculing the movement by sort of making light of this, because this was actually last year, and it was at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests and things, just after George Floyd, the American man, was murdered, and that's what sort of triggered everything. So she was accused, I suppose, of ridiculing it, but she says, I know I'm not racist, and, you know, she has actually, we should say, found another job at Marks and Spencer, and, you know, good for her. But surely the fact that even an employment tribunal heard her case and decided that she was rightly sacked, and then her appeal was refused. I mean, it had to go through so many levels. That's a really damning indictment of the people sort of in charge of making sure that people get a fair hearing and that, you know, common sense prevails. Common sense did not prevail in this instance.
Absolutely. I think if that colleague thought that what she said was offensive, I think we really have to ask, okay, what is the best way to respond to that? I think what we have right now is an appeal to authority. We have the attempt to get people removed from their job, what some people describe as, in the extreme end, cancel culture. I would argue, if you hear someone that says something that you find offensive, maybe ask them, what did you mean by that? You can even just say, you know, I'm not really okay with that. You can think about it this way. Can you perhaps not do that in the future? This idea that you remove all of that normal interpersonal interaction and actually go straight to actually going to get somebody removed, I think is a damning indictment, as you mentioned, on the fact that the whole entire breakdown of civil discourse, where you have to take these really extreme measures.
Have we lost the sense of the idea that intent actually matters rather than what is actually said, because different people interpret different words in different ways, and you can often get misunderstandings. Why was intent apparently not taken into account here?
I think that you make a fundamental point. I think that's been some of the most significant shifts when we discuss racism or issues of offence over the last 10 years, where it moves away from actually looking at it objectively and having a clear criteria that you can assess whether or not that person intended to do it, what the impact was, and now it's moved to purely the subjective. So just on the basis of someone saying that they're offended, on the basis of saying that they're hurt by something, that you have to automatically take that person's account as the God's honest truth. And this is this whole idea of lived experience, which is this unquestioning acceptance of people's personal interpretation of a particular incident. And I think that this then leaves situations like this, where lots of people get fallen through the cracks as a result.
And we're seeing more and more situations like this. It seems to be an increasingly common occurrence. How do we fix this? How do we change? Is this a cultural thing? Does this require legislation? How do we change? How do we stop people falling through the cracks, as you just said?
I think it's going to be a whole range of things. If you look at the kind of Maya Forstater case in relation to gender-critical beliefs, it took her to go to the courts to find out that those certain beliefs were actually protected. When it comes to jokes, I think that has to be a cultural thing, because it's not just people in little interpersonal incidents in their work. You're seeing it with comedians as well, not being able to actually express themselves or make jokes that a wide variety of people find funny, but don't feel like they can really laugh at because they're scared of the backlash. So I think it's going to take a huge cultural shift to actually open up the space and say, hold on, there's much better ways of dealing with offence. Actually, freedom of expression, being much more tolerant, viewpoint diversity, all of these things enrich society, and not being so sensitive, not assuming bad faith when people do things that we find offensive.
Well, Inaya, thank you so much. Always very articulate. Oh, that's a microaggression. Apparently, you're not allowed to say black people. That is a microaggression.
What are we not allowed to do now?
So you can't tell black people they're articulate because...
because you're assuming they might not be otherwise.
Yeah, because it's a microaggression. So I apologise for offending you so deeply.
I'm so hurt.